Hello, welcome. Happy to see all of you here today. I'm Stephanie McNally. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at Vivalon, and we are so pleased to have all of you here with us today. Welcome to our first collaboration with the Buck Institute here at the Vivalon Healthy Aging Campus. We are thrilled to be hosting this presentation, How to Be Your Own Geriatrician by Dr. John Newman and moderated by Chris Rebelo. We will have closed captioning in Spanish during the presentation, which you should be able to see here. If you haven't already signed in, we ask that you please sign in on one of the clipboards at the entrance or one that might be passed around. Gathering the names of the people we serve with our programs helps our team learn from every event, resulting in offerings that are relevant for the community that we serve. We need only your first and last name. And if you would like to subscribe to the Vivalon Insider newsletter, please add your email address to the notes column or check in with guest services on your way out. John Newman, MD, PhD, is an assistant professor at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging and in the Division of Geriatrics at University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. His career goal is to translate our expanding understanding of aging biology to improve care and help maintain the independence of older adults. Buck Institute studies the molecular details of how diet and fasting regulate the genes and pathways that in turn control aging. Dr. Newman is also a geriatrician who cares for hospitalized older adults at UCSF and the San Francisco VA Medical Center, focusing on preserving mobility and preventing delirium. Chris Rebelo, the Buck Institute's Senior Director of Communications, started her career as a news reporter on radio and television. She came to the Buck in 2003 and developed its first media relations program. She's been a witness to the Institute's growth and success and to the dramatic increase in the public's interest in healthy aging. She enjoys working with Buck scientists, helping translate their work for the public. Please welcome Dr. John Newman and Chris Rebelo.
Thank you for the very, very kind introduction. We are thrilled to be here. If during the course of this event you can't hear, raise your hand. Oh, we got a couple hands in the back there, so maybe boost it a little bit. So before we get to the meat of the program, I'm curious, how many of you here have been to the Buck? Good deal. Okay, that's great. I'm going to show a short video that is going to bring everybody up to date. Let's hope I hit the right button. Yes.
The Buck Institute is interested in understanding aging, not only to make us live longer, but to actually alleviate and suppress the development of diseases.
Chronic disease is the great health challenge of our time.
As loud as it goes, we'll talk louder when we do.
Aging is the main driver of chronic disease. To eliminate chronic disease, we must harness the biology of aging so we can live healthy longer. The Buck Institute is the world's first research organization dedicated solely to the biology of aging. We work with the building blocks of biology to understand how we age.
The Buck is concentrating on really trying to go to the root of the problem, so understanding that we can sort of intervene really early.
The Buck Institute is probably the best place in the world to be working on aging because there's so many different aspects of aging that are being studied. It's key because no one lab can do it all.
Our scientific explorers are brilliant, curious, and committed.
The idea that you could actually develop drugs that slow down the aging process was really something that 20 or 30 years ago people thought this cannot be done. Not only can it be done, but we will do it.
The pieces are in place. and we are in a unique position to put them together. Our world is defined by paradigm shifts, created by scientific discoveries. The biology of aging is the next frontier.
What we've discovered is that the mechanisms of aging themselves are intimately related to the mechanisms of human disease. If we can eradicate the aging component to disease, we're all going to live healthier and longer.
It's just an incredible vision that really will, surpass anything else that we've ever seen before.
We are inviting you to a future of aging without illness. It's happening today, and it's happening here. Join us.
Okay, so before we begin, I just want to say that we welcome your questions today. We're going to go through a presentation. John and I are going to have a conversation. You can ask a question at any time. We're asking that you write your questions down on note cards. Hopefully you got some as you came in. If you need a note card, raise your hand. Somebody will get it to you. Great. And we do that because it really helps me as a moderator. If I see there are 5 people who have questions about a particular topic, it helps me make sure that it gets covered. Also, about John. John, yes, is an MD. He's a doctor, but he's not your doctor. And you will note he doesn't have a white lab coat on today. So he can't do clinic, and he's not here to offer second or third opinions on anything. But he's great with questions. Please make them of general interest. Okay. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming. I'm going to use my outdoor voice. This is good. And tell me if it should be louder.
That's great. So
Geriatricians get very good at learning to speak up.
So this event is about learning how to be your own geriatrician. We are in a scary situation because there are only in this country 1 geriatrician for every 10,000 people. So there is a shortage. So complexity. What's different about geriatricians? How do they approach medicine?
Well, why do we need geriatricians? Maybe let's start. Who out there knows what has heard of geriatricians? This is already a really friendly audience. I'll be honest, when I'm walking around the hospital and I introduce myself, the most common answer I get is, so you're going to help me decide what to order for lunch? I think they heard I'm a nutritionist. But maybe once a day, someone will actually recognize, oh, a geriatrician. You're a doctor who specializes in older adults, the complex, unique, special problems of older adults. And that's what geriatricians are for. That's what we do. Who's actually seen a geriatrician? I'm guessing a lot fewer hands. A lot fewer hands. There's only a few thousand of us, like Chris was saying, in the entire country. Maybe we would need 10 times, maybe even 20 times that many to actually care for all of the older adults who would benefit from a geriatrician, which isn't necessarily all older adults. So that's why so many of us get involved in how to teach other doctors how to care for older adults, or how to talk to people about how geriatricians think, like we're doing today, so that you can take these ideas to your own doctors and together with your doctor, start a little geriatrics clinic of your own in that office room. Because the way geriatricians think, we are different because you are different. And every one of you is different from each other, and you are a different person than you were a few years ago, and so am I. That's that heterogeneity, that complexity. That's what geriatricians thrive in. That's our natural environment. Everything is complicated, but that's okay because we can figure it out. Every different piece of you interacts with every other piece of you. So a lot of you probably see doctors for your heart or for your lungs or for your kidneys. And, a lot of doctors divide themselves up like that. So, a piece of the body at a time. And there's good reason for that. But the thing is, in your body, the heart talks to the brain and the brain talks to the kidneys. And how you approach treating one problem will affect other parts of you too. And ultimately, what most of us want isn't to have a perfect heart for its own sake, but it's to have a good heart so that we can do stuff, so that we can go for walks or hikes, so we can play with our grandkids, so we can work even, so we can do research work, so we can volunteer at places like Vivalon in the Buck. We want to do stuff. So that the viewpoint of a geriatrician is everything affects everything else. So whenever we're talking about the most narrow problem, we need to think about how it affects the entire person in front of us, with an eye towards that big picture. How is this going to help that person do what they want to do? So that's what makes a geriatrician.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about geriatric syndromes, which I know that's your focus. So you talked about complexity. How does it all work together?
Yeah, if you were to ask me, so you're not a heart doctor or a kidney doctor, but that all sounds pretty hand wavy. What do you really specialize in? I would probably say the geriatric syndromes. Most of you probably haven't heard that term before, but geriatric syndromes are problems that are, first of all, very common. They affect lots of us. They're really impactful. They can change your life, and usually not in a good way, but they're inherently complicated. They're the result of lots of different problems and conditions and just features of aging, all combining in a way that creates a bigger problem. My favorite, or maybe least favorite example of that are falls. Falls are very common. They can really change your life if you break something. But what goes into a fall? Is that usually a brain problem, or is it a heart problem, or is it a muscle problem, or is it a medication problem? Is it a walker problem? Is it an environment problem? Yes, all of those things could go into a fall. So you have to think very, very big picture, very systematically on how to prevent falls. Other geriatric syndromes, I think of geriatricians think of cognitive decline or dementia as a geriatric syndrome. Like, yes, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. These are very specific diseases that certain molecular pathways cause, but it's never just that. If someone's having cognitive decline, that's maybe mostly from Alzheimer's disease, it's also related to their cardiovascular system, their heart, their blood vessels. It's also related to their environment, how much stimulation they have and how much they're interacting with people, whether they're lonely, whether they're isolated, how active they are, the medications they take, including over-the-counter medications. So much goes into how our brains function that it's not just that one thing. And so dementia is a geriatric syndrome. And we'll talk a bit later about delirium, a confusional state, suddenly getting confused, especially when you're sick or in the hospital. And that's very much a geriatric syndrome, hugely impactful and terrible. And that's one of my specialties in trying to identify and treat in the hospital.
Great. So each of you got handouts. This is a handout that focuses on something that I'm really excited about. It's age-friendly health systems. And so medical centers around the country are hopefully starting to adopt this. It is focused on 4 M's that we're going to keep going back to today: what matters, medication, your mind, and your mobility. You're gonna see this slide come up a few times during this because I want to burn this into your mind. It's important. Before you go to the doctor the next time, you should really go through this, fill it out, think about it. This is sort of a roadmap for you to take what we talk about today into your life and then into your own medical care. So the 4M's. So the first one, John, is all about what matters. And I know that that may be the most difficult one of all four. So as a geriatrician, how do you approach what matters, and how should these folks approach what matters?
Yeah, and Chris, the big picture is that when you're, especially when you're in the hospital, since I mostly work in the hospital, but every time you see your doctor, even if you're going in for, I don't know, maybe you have a pneumonia and that's why you're in the hospital, and the doctors will know how to treat that pneumonia, but that's not enough. If you kill all those bacteria and cure your pneumonia, but you wind up not being able, you walked into the hospital, but you can't walk out, that's not good. That's not success. That's not fixing you, even though the pneumonia is fine. So the 4M's are all about how to take care of the whole person, particularly while you're in the hospital, but every time you interact with the healthcare system, so that all of you winds up getting better, and not just the bit that the doctor is focusing on. So yeah, mobility, mind or medications, and what matters. It's actually 4M's and a W, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, yes.
But we couldn't think of a better word to capture what matters.
So in your experience, like, what are some of the different things that matter to people? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody's different, right? What's your experience?
So there's a couple of things that what matters encapsulates. One of them is, what do you want out of your healthcare? What is your goal? What is most important to you to be able to do better or to be able to keep doing? And your medical care should be oriented to help you accomplish that. And that may mean that you focus on one problem more than another, because one problem is more relevant to, I don't know, helping you to be able to continue hiking, or helping you to be able to continue taking care of your grandkids. Knowing what that focus of yours is helps you then decide with your doctors what problems are most important and where you're going to focus. One thing we've learned is you can't try to do everything about everything in medicine. If you try to do too much, you can wind up doing harm. So you need to be a little bit thoughtful about, what's most important. What medicines are most important to me? How important is that surgery? Just because I can do this, just because my doctor can offer this, just because it's possible, is it actually going to help me? Is it something I should do? And that's part of what matters. Part of what matters is also a little more nuts and bolts. It's, what kind of medical care do you want or not want? Some people have very strong feelings, and in my family too, about, do you want to be on life support? Under what contexts? What if you might not be able to come off of that? But would you want to try it anyway? Making sure that your doctors are doing care that you want and not doing things that you don't want, because that can be very important to a lot of people. And also making sure we know how you make decisions. So hopefully you're making the decisions together with your doctors, you're in charge of things, but sometimes our medical problems affect how we think. Sometimes we're unconscious. Sometimes our problems just make our brains not work, like if we have delirium in the hospital. So if that's the case, who else can help? Who can help make medical decisions? We call those healthcare proxies, or powers of attorney for healthcare. And knowing who that is really important, because doctors don't want to make decisions for you. We want you to be in charge of your own care always, even if you're not able to speak for yourself.
So talk about, I think it comes under what matters, the tendency for older adults to either get undertreated or overtreated.
Yeah, getting that balance right can be really challenging, and can also depend on the doctor that you're seeing. It's so easy, and we'll talk more about why this is, for doctors and researchers to just kind of throw up their hands like, well, what do you expect? We get old and stuff happens. But it turns out we can actually, and so that's why for a long time, the studying aging as a biological phenomenon, as a field of science, was pretty niche, pretty small. But it turns out that aging is driven by biology that we can understand. Just like we can understand what drives cancer, we can understand what drives aging. but that's true for medical problems too. One of the people I'd most admire, a researcher who started her career at Yale and is now at Harvard, named Sharon Inouye. She observed when she was a young doctor, a young geriatrician working at Yale Hospital, she noted that many of the older people that she was seeing in the hospital were very confused. And all the doctors around her just ignored that. Like, that's normal. They're just old. And then she talked to their family members who told her, actually, that's not what she's like. That's not what my dad is like. That's not what my mom is like. They were totally fine 2 days ago, and they're completely different now. They don't have dementia. This is not them. And that got Sharon, Dr. Inouye, to get really, really excited about, well, what's actually happening here? What's happening in these people's bodies and brains that a normal person walked with a normal brain gets sick and then suddenly looks like they have dementia. So she more or less founded the field of study of delirium. But she was told by her advisor, her career mentor, why would you want to study that? It's just something that happens to people who get old. And you hear that all the time. So it's so easy to be undertreated for problems that have good solutions that can be tailored to older adults. It's also easy to get overtreated because doctors like to do stuff. And when you get older, you guys have seen that your chart gets longer and longer because stuff goes on and it never comes off. The number of pills you take probably gets a little bit longer. And so there's just lots of stuff that a doctor could do. We could do this procedure, we could do this surgery, we could add this medicine, but you can't do everything. If you try to do everything, you wind up doing usually more harm than good. So you have to strike that balance between getting the treatment you need that's helpful and not skipping over stuff just because it happens, but also being careful not to overdo things in a way that could cause more harm than good.
So, John.
And that's where the goals come in. That's where your priorities come in to decide what's most important.
Right. Can you tell that great story you told me once about the fellow at UCSF who wanted to go travel to his granddaughter's wedding? Everybody got behind and helped him do that, right?
Yeah. This was someone that I was taking care of. It was a veteran. So I'm not speaking for the VA. None of this is official from the VA, but I do work at the VA. So one of our veterans who was living in our nursing home at the time, disabled, older veteran, Vietnam era veteran, and he had a lot of serious medical problems going on. That's why he was in our community living center, as we call it, because it really is more of a community than a nursing home. He was on a lot of oxygen all the time, had a lot of medicines, had a hard time getting around, needed a lot of help. But yeah, his granddaughter was getting married in Philadelphia. And he really, really wanted to go see be at his granddaughter's wedding. Talking about goals. That was his most important goal for that year, to be able to be at his granddaughter's wedding. And it would have been so easy to say, that's just not possible. How could you even get to the airport, let alone get on a plane? And how does oxygen work on a plane? And but it's entirely possible. It took a lot of work by a lot of doctors and nurses and talking to the airlines and figuring out how things were going to work in Philadelphia and talking to the Philadelphia VA to coordinate, making sure that he could be taken care of in Philadelphia too. And we made it happen.
That's so great.
We got him on the plane. He was there for his daughter's wedding. Everything went just fine. He came back to San Francisco and it was amazing.
Great. So now we're going to talk about medications. You have another handout that is all about medications, what to use with caution, what to avoid. So this is the question I always ask John. Out of everything that older adults take that drives you crazy, what drives you crazy the most?
Benadryl. Sounds like that might be news to a few people, in which case, good. Benadryl is an example of anticholinergics. So these are medicines that act in a certain way on receptors in your body and your brain. They're often allergy medicines, antihistamines, who also work on the cholinergic system. But there are some other medicines that fall into the anticholinergic category too. So they're great examples. Many things are over the counter, right? So you can buy Benadryl for allergies. I'm using the brand name Benadryl, but the generic version of Benadryl or very similar medicine is the most common ingredient in over-the-counter sleep aids. So you don't really know that you're taking something like Benadryl, but it's in those pills. The reason why these are so concerning for older people, Benadryl makes you sleepy, right? So when you're younger, it makes you sleepy. When you're older, it makes you sleepy. When you're older, it also affects how your brain functions. It can make people not just sleepy, but have worse memory, become confused, even get delirious. And that can happen very quickly. Even worse, and this is science that's emerged just over the last 10 years or so. These medicines have a long-term effect on your brain. It's not just that they make you sleepy and then you're better, but over the years, it all builds up. A scary finding that I saw not long ago is an estimate that up to 10% of all dementia in the US might be related to a lifetime of exposure to these medicines. So, like a lot of medicines, they're perfectly safe and good, helpful when used in the right context. But if you take too much of them for too long, it's not great for you, but especially if you're older.
So that includes like Tylenol PM.
PM.
Anything that has a PM on it?
Yep. Diphenhydramine is the name of the generic form of Benadryl, and that's the most common one that you'll see in the drugstore. But there's a few others. In general, be wary of any over-the-counter sleep aids, and be wary of allergy medicines, antihistamines, unless they're the non-drowsy form. The non-drowsy ones are better.
Let's talk a little bit about pain, which obviously often comes with the aging process. So a lot of us got started on NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Not so great over the long term, right?
Well, something to think about carefully as you get older. And it's an example of, you may be taking medicines for a long time when you're younger, and you may have been on something for 20 or 30 years, and it's always worked great for you. And maybe it'll still work great, but our bodies do change, and the way our bodies react to medicines can change. So it's always important to take a pause once in a while with your doctor and kind of go through, is this still good for me? Should I think about trying to change or adjust this? And NSAIDs are an example of that. So NSAIDs are medicines like ibuprofen or naproxen that are over the counter, commonly used for pain relief. But taking them for a long time, especially as we get older, can cause problems. So they can affect your kidneys. They can make it more likely that your stomach will bleed. They can cause heart problems. In general, as we get older, they become an example of medicines that we should think carefully about. Not necessarily that you should never take them, but you should think about why you're taking them and how important that is. So if you have bad arthritis and nothing else seems to have really helped, but your naproxen at least takes the edge off enough that you can walk, you can go outside and go for your stroll, you can play with your grandkids, then it's probably worth it. You're taking that medicine for a specific purpose that it works for, and that helps you achieve your goals. And if it has some more risks now that you're older, that's okay. You accept those risks because it's doing good for you. But if it's not doing good for you, or if the purpose isn't as clear, or maybe there's something else that can work safer and just as well, maybe you try switching and see if something else works instead.
So what are other options that are safer to deal with pain?
Well, Tylenol, for example, acetaminophen, is really safe, unless you take a ton of it, but it's actually pretty hard to take that much of it. But day-to-day, acetaminophen is very safe, safer than NSAIDs. And if that works for your pain, great. There's a lot of topical medicines for joint pains, for example, including topical forms of NSAIDs. And they're better than taking the pills. They're safer than taking the pills. So maybe there's topical things that can help. Or think about the whole universe of things that aren't pills too. So if it's a joint that's bothering you, what about a joint brace? Maybe trying physical therapy again to strengthen your muscles around that joint to see if that can help pain too, which often it does. Maybe think about if you're already using a cane, think about, is the cane high enough? Should it be a different form, different design in order to make walking less painful? So what are all the different things that you might do to address that pain and to make sure that the pain doesn't prevent you from doing what you need to do, what you want to do? Because that's the key. How do you treat that pain enough that using whatever is at your disposal to be able to do what you need to do?
And before we move on real quickly, so aspirin, for years it was like, oh, take a baby aspirin. It's good. Everybody should be taking baby aspirins. It's not the case, right?
Well, sometimes. So it's one of those things where we're learning to be a little more precise about who benefits from aspirin and who doesn't. And some big studies. So, 20 years ago, there were very, very few big randomized controlled trials of medicine in older adults. Even though, you guys know older adults take a lot of medicines. I mean, pick whatever problem you want to think about, whatever medicine you want to think about. Most of the people it affects are older adults. And yet, largely, we didn't have data in older adults. That's scandalous. That's horrible. It's changing. It's changing in part through a lot of very kind of focused effort from organizations like the National Institutes of Health, the National Institutes of Aging, the AARP, to try to make sure we're actually doing trials in the people who we need the information on, older adults. So aspirin is an example where there have been a couple of big studies recently that kind of narrow in. It's probably not something everyone should take. If your heart is basically healthy, the risks of aspirin, which are mostly bleeding in your stomach, but also rarely bleeding in your brain, the risks of aspirin outweigh the benefits. But if your heart's not so healthy, the higher risk you are for heart disease, the more benefit you get from aspirin. So we're learning to be a little more precise, and your doctor can actually use calculators to figure out where you fall on that spectrum of more heart risk or less heart risk, and can then tell you, would it help you personally to take an aspirin, or should you not?
So assuming that maybe my doctor's too busy, or very busy when I go in for my checkup, which I'm going to go tomorrow, I need to ask her, okay, so should I what's on my list? I'm going to talk louder. So, we need to talk to our doctors about that. We need to not assume that our doctors know everything that we're taking. And
yeah, and especially the part about updating once in a while with your doctors. So, to be honest, if you're seeing your doctor for a 15-20 minute visit, which is crazy, but that's kind of the standard, there's probably a list of things that are popping up on the computer for them that they need to ask you about and check off. That's probably not the same list of things that you would like to talk about. And it's not necessarily the list of things that I would want to talk about. Like, is this medicine still right for you after 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? So when you see your doctor, make sure the first thing you should do is tell them what's our agenda? And here's mine. And then have a quick negotiation with them, because they'll have something that they think they really need to talk to you about, which might be really important. Maybe you're due for a vaccine, maybe you're due for cancer screening. But set that agenda right in the beginning to make sure that you get a say in it, and that you get your concerns addressed. And I'd say every few years, make sure one of those things that is on your agenda is, let's go through my medicines and just double check if they're all still okay, or if we should change something.
so our next slide, why are side effects worse in older adults? So what is it about the aging body that is important to understand?
Yeah, our bodies do change as we age. Well, yeah, you just learned something, right? You didn't know that before. So our bodies do change, but they change in ways that affect medicines. And these are important to realize. And these are why, even if you've been on the same same medicine, the same dose for 20 years, it may still make sense to adjust it because your body has been changing during those 20 years. So the way that we process medicines changes as we get older. Especially many medicines are processed through the kidneys. So as our kidneys change as we age, those medicines might become effectively more potent. It's almost like you're taking a higher dose, even though the pill is the same. And so the dose may need to be adjusted. Our bodies also change. We tend to lose muscle. We'll talk more about that, how to minimize that. But we tend to lose muscle and gain fat. Medicines some medicines seek out the fat in your body and they kind of hang out there. It becomes sort of like a storage yard for medicines. So in the same way, the same dose may actually act differently because more of it's going into fat cells and less of it is in circulation. Or maybe it lasts longer because it's coming out of that storage yard. So even if you're taking the same pill, the way that same pill acts in your body will change. And the other important thing is that the way your body responds to side effects will change. Every medicine has side effects. Hopefully you don't even notice them. But if you do, as we get older, we become less resilient in a way, so that the sort of thing that you might not even notice when you were younger suddenly becomes a serious problem. Benadryl is a great example of that. So that bit of drowsiness or sleepiness that maybe when you're younger, you can just work through anyway. It doesn't really put you to sleep. You just, your extra cup of coffee and you're fine. When you're older, maybe that drowsiness becomes more serious. Maybe it actually puts you to sleep. Maybe it's not safe for you to drive anymore when you're taking it. Or maybe that drowsiness, it's not just that you're getting drowsy, but it's actually affecting your brain even more and making you confused, affecting your memory. So what was a barely noticeable side effect when you were younger is suddenly a more serious problem now. And that's a common thing with medicines. So our bodies change.
So a new symptom is a medication side effect until proven otherwise.
That was one of the first things I learned when I was a doctor in training at our San Francisco VA from one of my mentors. Always think about side effects as a possibility. Not always going to be the case, but when someone comes to me with a new symptom, a new problem, one of the first things I want to know is what's changed among your medicines. Have you started anything new? Stopped anything? Changed doses? What's new? Because maybe we can solve the problem really simply. And what you want to avoid is getting into these cascades, these like waterfalls of badness, where you have a side effect from a medicine, maybe didn't realize it was a side effect, maybe your doctor didn't realize it was a side effect, think it's actually a different problem, and then you get another medicine to treat that problem.
So talk about that particular cascade, which I think is a great example.
And all of this is real. These are things that happen. Blood pressure, you should absolutely treating blood pressure is one of the best things you can do to preserve your health and reduce your chance of dying. So you should absolutely treat blood pressure. But blood pressure medicines have side effects. One of them, amlodipine, can cause swelling in the legs. It doesn't really mean anything. If it's bothersome, then you could try a different medicine, but it doesn't mean your heart is not working or anything. It's just a side effect. But it looks just the same as if your legs were swelling because your heart was failing. So if your doctor thought that wasn't a side effect, but what if that's actually a bit of heart failure? And now they're going to prescribe you a medicine, a water pill, to get rid of the excess fluid from heart failure. And boy, the first time you take one of those water pills, it's no joke. Speaking of waterfalls, so it's actually really common that people are incontinent from taking water pills, but maybe they don't realize it's the water pill. Maybe they just think they're getting old, and there's a pill for that. Remember, there's a pill for that. So maybe you take a pill that's for incontinence, like one called oxybutynin. Oxybutynin is another example of an anticholinergic medicine. So it is a medicine for bladder incontinence, but it can cause confusion. So next time your son or your daughter brings you to the doctor saying that you're confused and they're worried you have dementia, And you've gone down this whole list of getting worse and worse each time, but it's all just side effects. And the right thing to do would have been to recognize that the very first thing, that bit of leg swelling, was a side effect from the blood pressure medicine, and switch to a different one. And all of that would have been avoided. So I will admit that this is both a geriatrician's greatest fear of meeting people at the end of this after they've been hurt inadvertently. But it's also one of my most rewarding things is to either prevent that from happening in the first place, or figure out that I could cure someone's dementia, incontinence, and heart failure by just stopping a couple of medicines.
Great. Okay, so now we are going to start talking about mind and also mobility. So let's move into the hospital where you often work. So let's talk, the thing here is up to 80% of new disabilities occur around a hospitalization. Let's see, I think I have the slide about mobility. So first question, how many here have spent a day or two at a hospital? Okie dokie. So
let me ask the next question. How much time did you spend in bed while you were in the hospital? Most of it, right? How much time do you spend in bed normally? Not that much. So that is very, very common, and researchers have measured this. I love that. So this is actual data. We're doing science, Chris. Yeah. We're doing science. This is accelerometry data from a hospital in Kansas. So every older adult that was admitted to their hospital, they put a couple of patches onto them that would record their movements, same way your phone does. And then they just recorded, as long as they were in the hospital, how much they were walking, how much they were just up, how much they were sitting, and how much they were in bed. These were people who none of them had dementia. They all lived in their own homes in the community. Their normal lives involved lots of walking around, just like you guys. They did not spend all day in bed. But when they were in the hospital, they spent 83% of their time in bed. So, I mean, probably normally you would spend 8-10 hours in bed. And same for these people. But when they were in the hospital, they spent 20 hours a day in bed. And that's, I hate to use the word normal. That is completely normal, but terrible. Because immobility, lying in bed, is the fastest way to lose muscle. And we often don't have a whole lot of muscle to lose when we're older, but we can lose it very fast. How fast older adults lose muscle from just lying in bed, when that's studied, you can lose 15% of leg strength in just 10 days. And that's leg strength, like the ability to stand up from a chair and the ability to walk up a flight of stairs. And that's best case scenario. Those are healthy, fit people who researchers ask to stay in bed for 10 days. The reality is, in a hospital, it's probably several times worse than that. My rule of thumb is I tell people every day you're in bed, you're probably losing up to 3% of your muscle strength. Every day. And that adds up, over 4 days, 5 days, that adds up fast. And it's the equivalent of so we all gradually lose muscle as we get older too. That one day is like getting older a whole year. So the most important thing that I do, I feel like, as a geriatrician in the hospital, advising other doctors how to help older adults, is to make sure they're getting out of bed. But we make that so hard. And you guys who have been in the hospital, I see you nodding. There's so many reasons why we all stay in bed in the hospital. Part of that is, well, there's a bed. Often there's nothing else in the room. There's no chairs. And we serve meals in bed. The TV is attached to the bed. So even if you were perfectly healthy, there would be a lot of reasons to stay in bed. But then we also make it hard for you to get up. We attach wires to your chest, to your fingers, to your earlobes to measure your heart rate and your oxygen. There's IVs. Often we set bed alarms. So if you try to get up, all of a sudden it's like someone's breaking into Fort Knox. And we worry about you falling. We tell you we don't want you to fall, ask for help before you get up, and then we take too long to answer the call button. So all sorts of reasons why we make it harder than it even should be. None of those are good reasons to stay in bed in the hospital. If you remember nothing else from today, remember that it is really important to be as mobile as you can in the hospital, and that your family should help you advocate for that, and you should advocate with your doctors and nurses for that. My favorite extreme example of this, you can find videos online if you internet search for ICU liberation. I think you know where I'm going here. You can find videos online of people who are on breathing machines, on ventilators, and every other wire known to man, walking in the intensive care unit. So if you can walk in the intensive care unit when you're hooked up to a dialysis machine and a breathing machine, you can walk anywhere in the hospital. There's very few reasons why you should have to stay in bed. And the more you're mobile, the better, the faster you'll recover, and the more likely it is that you will return to the person you were before you came to the hospital. And that's the whole point, that the hospital is supposed to help fix you, help you return to health. And part of that is fixing the pneumonia or treating the cancer, but a big part of that is treating the rest of you too, and keeping the rest of you fit.
So the other big hospital danger that you have mentioned is delirium. There is a handout in our packet here, so take that home, keep it handy. So what is delirium, and why do we get it?
Delirium is probably one of the worst things that many of us have experienced or seen, but not known what it is. And I won't ask you to raise your hands this time, but if you've had the experience of watching a loved one in the hospital suddenly become not themselves, and often very dramatically not themselves, not knowing where they are, what they're doing, thinking that the nurses are trying to hurt them, imagining that they're being attacked, imagining that people are stealing from them, suddenly getting paranoid about the people they love, about their family members. That's delirium. It's a medical condition. One phrase we use to describe it is acute brain failure, which maybe more kind of gives you a sense of what it actually means. When you're sick and your brain just doesn't have what it needs to work normally, that's delirium. It's very common. It happens to almost everyone in an intensive care unit, even young people, but it happens to a lot of older people, regardless of what their medical problem is. So even a bladder infection could trigger a delirium. And certainly if you're really sick, you're more likely to get delirious. The important thing is it's a medical problem. It's sort of like the fever for your brain. If the person in front of me is delirious, there's something seriously bad happening, and I need to figure out what it is and fix it. Because delirium it's not like a stroke usually. It's not that something is wrong with your brain. It's that something bad is happening in your body that your brain is reacting to. And that could be an infection. It could be kidney failure. It could be liver failure. But usually there's some sort of serious medical problem triggering it, and we need to figure out what it is. A lot of it is also preventable. Because everything is complicated, right? Nothing is just one thing. So your brain can be more resilient or less resilient based on what we do in the hospital. So if we're keeping you up all night and we're preventing you from sleeping, and then you're sleeping all day, and you're staying in bed, and you're not walking, and we're not giving you food that you can eat, and you don't have your hearing aids with you, so you can't hear what's going on around you, and you can't see because your glasses are at home. If we do all those things, you're more likely to get delirious, because all those things are little insults on your brain. Not being able to see, not being able to hear, not being able to sleep, not being able to eat and drink. So if we do all those things well, you can actually prevent a lot of delirium, probably a third of it, which is kind of crazy. If your hospital is designed to let you sleep whenever possible, to get you out of bed and move, to make sure you can see, make sure you can hear, make sure you can eat and drink, make sure that you're able to talk to people, you're interacting, make sure that the room is a more home-like, familiar environment for you. If your hospital does all those things well, there's a lot less delirium. And that means that people leave the hospital in much better shape and are more likely to be the person that they were when they came in. So that's a big part of what are called age-friendly health systems. There are hospitals that implement stuff like this because it's actually, it sounds crazy to say, but it's really hard to design a hospital to let people get a good night's sleep. So you have to be very purposeful about that. The way that the rooms are designed, the way that the staff are scheduled, the way that medicines are scheduled, it's way more complicated than it should be. But look for age-friendly health systems and look for hospitals that have units that specialize in older adults. This is a thing. They're sometimes called acute care of elders units, and they're sometimes called a hospital elder life program. UCSF, the Parnassus Hospital, has an acute care of elders unit. So does the new San Francisco General Hospital. And believe it or not, they actually designed the San Francisco General Hospital around the acute care of elders unit. The floor, they built the floor specifically for that. And it's the floor that goes out onto an outdoor terrace, which was on purpose to give older people a place to walk to. A good reason to get out of bed and to be able to help them walk down the hallway and sit outside as part of a delirium prevention program. So hospitals can be designed and run in ways that are best for you guys. And the thing is, Chris, when a hospital is designed to be good for older adults, it's actually good for everyone.
Right.
Because everyone benefits. Everyone gets healthier faster.
So, assuming that one has a trip to the hospital in their future, or maybe they're facing chemotherapy, or they have like a big medical challenge coming up that could involve the healthcare system in a big way. What should they do to prepare?
Well, so a few things. A few things are pretty simple to do, and some that might be harder. But if you have a big health challenge coming up, that's a great time to try to find a geriatrician, or try to find a clinic that specializes in getting older adults ready for health challenges. These might be called, if you're getting ready for a surgery, they might be called surgical wellness clinics. There's an example at UCSF, or a pre-habilitation clinic. So you've heard of rehabilitation. That's when you're getting better after the surgery. But pre-habilitation means trying to get better before the surgery. But those can be hard to find. So you can also try to do what they would do just with you and your family and your doctor. So that involves getting a little more fit, being purposeful about getting a little more mobile, and like a graduated exercise program that you can work out with your doctor or ask for a referral to a physical therapist. Going through your medicines carefully to kind of do spring cleaning before your chemotherapy or before your big surgery. Make sure there's nothing on that medicine list that shouldn't be there. Think through what matters. The worst case outcome for most people from a big surgery isn't dying during the surgery. That actually very rarely happens anyway. Most people would say, well, if I die, I die. But what worries most people is what's going to happen if I don't die? What's going to happen if I'm disabled, if I'm not the same person afterwards? What happens if I'm in the intensive care unit for a long time? So think about ahead of time what's important to you, what you want to avoid, what you want to work through, and who would help you. Who would help you make decisions if you needed that? Who would help you recover afterwards? Who could help you clean up around the house and get chores done if you're a little bit weaker after your surgery while you're recovering. And the last thing is pack a go bag. It's so often people get to the hospital and then they don't have their hearing aids, they don't have their glasses, they don't have shoes they can walk around the hallway in. So bring a change of clothes, bring some kind of indoor shoe that you can walk in. Slippers that cover your whole foot are a great thing. Something that's safe to walk in, but better than the socks they're going to give you. Make sure you bring your glasses, your dentures, your hearing aids, spare copies. So sometimes things do get lost, but have an extra pair of glasses around. And if you've thought ahead about your goals, and if you have designated people who could speak for you if you couldn't, a power of attorney, an advance directive, bring that with you too. And bring something you love. Bring something that can make the hospital room more of your place, your space. Maybe that's a favorite blanket, maybe it's a favorite sweater, maybe it's pictures of your family. Bring something to occupy your mind. Bring a good book. Bring your laptop and your tablet and your phone. Bring your chargers. Don't forget those too. Make a list of all these things, and then on the morning when you're heading into the hospital, go through your checklist and make sure everything you need is in your go bag.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the mind and the importance of social interaction. Everybody here is probably ahead of the game. The fact that you're here says great things about how you're addressing that. But talk about community and how that plays into being your own geriatrician.
Yeah, we're learning more and more how important it is to be engaged with each other. Or the flip side of that is how it can be difficult if you're isolated or experiencing loneliness. And those are different things. People can feel lonely in a crowd. That really is true. And people can be isolated but not lonely because they have ways of interacting with their friends and their family. And some of that's easier these days with phones and FaceTime and Zoom and all of that. But loneliness and isolation have real health effects. And we're learning, for example, that people experiencing bad loneliness are actually, they're more likely to die. They're more likely to get dementia. They're more likely to have heart problems. Their medical problems tend to be worse. We are social creatures, and we really need that. That's part of medical care. That's true in the hospital too. Part of a delirium prevention program is social interaction. Interacting with, hopefully not just the nurses, but with your family members, your friends who are visiting, and with other staff, and even with other patients. Some of these acute care of elders units have group meals. So instead of everyone having lunch, lying in their bed, everyone walks down the hallway, getting whatever help they need, walks down the hallway to the group lunch area, and then they have lunch together. And people can chat, they can learn about each other, and that's a great form of social interaction that is part of medical care. So that's probably the most important thing to note. Isolation and loneliness are important to medical care, and the medical profession is learning that more and more. There's recently a big effort by the state of California to address loneliness among older adults, and to come up with ways that we can better design our communities, better design our care systems, and simple things like even training community. What's the word I'm looking? Training people to basically take care of each other, to help each other interact. So each person learns a bit about how to address loneliness and how to help support another person, and then they actually support each other. So they're both doing a service for each other, and that actually helps. It sounds nice, but it actually helps with their medical well-being, and it helps to reduce their management of their chronic diseases, helps reduce their need to be in hospitals, and all sorts of good stuff too.
Talk about Alzheimer's drugs, because what's the latest with that? What do these folks need to know about what's on the horizon, what works, what doesn't work? How should they approach that topic? And we're getting great questions, so we're going to go to those next, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, Alzheimer's drugs it's an exciting and also complicated thing right now. It's exciting because as you've probably heard, there are several new drugs that have been approved by the FDA just in the last couple of years for Alzheimer's disease, with the idea that they treat the misfolded proteins and the plaques and the tangles that we think are at the heart of Alzheimer's disease. And this is new. So that's really exciting. The complicated part is they're not exactly miracles. We all wish they worked better. It's been important scientifically to learn that there is actually much more to Alzheimer's disease than just these specific misfolded proteins that we've all been mostly focusing on. But they can help. They can slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. If you or a loved one is struggling with Alzheimer's disease, especially early in the course, it's probably worth learning more about these drugs. The downside, though, is that they cause problems in about as many people as they help. And those problems can be serious. There are things like small bleeding in your brain or swelling in your brain. They're not small things. And taking the drugs requires going to a specialized center, getting MRIs in order to watch for these side effects. And most of them, I think, are infusions, sort of like chemotherapy drugs. So they're big deals. It's not an obvious slam dunk. Should everyone be on it? No. I can say that easily. Not everyone would benefit from them. Should a lot of people ask about them and find out if they might be more helpful than harmful? Yes. But that's the way I would ask your doctors about it. Find a center that specializes in these drugs because they are really complicated, and have a conversation with someone who knows a lot about them, about whether they're more likely to help you or hurt you. And that depends even on things like what your genetics are. If you have a certain mutation in a certain gene, you're likely to get the harm and unlikely to get the help. So you need to find that out first. So really exciting. And I wish it wasn't so complicated, but it is complicated.
So question here. Doctors have really scrutinized opioid drugs for the elderly, given the abuse by some. What thoughts do you have regarding opioids in the elderly when the limited and non-abusive use of opioids is the only thing that provides pain relief? And I've been in the hospital. I know those combination opioids, Tylenol things. So where do you stand? How should one talk to one's doctor? What's the scoop on that?
Well, we were talking about pain a bit earlier, and the idea of, using what you need, what you have to do in order to not let the pain stop you from doing things that are important for you to do. And part of that is, it's about the pain, but it's also about not letting the pain affect your health in a bad way. So, to a geriatrician, if you can't really walk because of pain, that's bad for all of you. That's bad for every part of you. And so, yeah, treating the pain is important for its own sake, but it's really important to let you be able to walk more. And opiates could be part of that. Opiates like NSAIDs, there are a lot of risks, especially in older people. You mentioned dependency, but I also think about sedation, making you sleepy, making you delirious, affecting memory. So they're not something that you would do without a good reason, but they are a tool that's available. And there's a lot of debate about like NSAIDs versus opiates, which are better, which are worse, which should you try first? And honestly, I'm not sure. They're both reasonable things to try in order to make sure that the pain doesn't stop you from doing the things you need to do.
So can you talk about dehydration and also in terms of delirium, but just overall, what do older adults need to know about dehydration?
Sure, and I love, Chris, that you mentioned delirium. I kind of breezed through this, but what I mentioned, it's important to be able to eat and drink when you're in the drinking part is actually really important. The very first big study in the New England Journal of Medicine for how to prevent delirium, it included preventing dehydration. All the other stuff too, getting out of bed, being mobile, getting a good night's sleep, but preventing dehydration is really important to your brain health. The thing is, as we get older, that becomes a little harder, both because there are circuits in our brains that register when we should be thirsty, and those circuits don't work as well as we get older. There's actually a laboratory at the Buck Institute that studies in a very sophisticated way the neuropeptides and the neuronal circuits that control thirst and how that changes as. So we don't always know that we should be thirsty, and sometimes we need to kind of schedule that for ourselves. You know, how much should I be drinking today? And you know, I'll set my goal and I'll stick to it. Our bodies are also more prone to getting dehydrated, and this is really relevant in a world where we're having more and more really hot days. As we get older, our kidneys can't concentrate our urine as much, and so we tend to lose more fluid as we get older, when our bodies should be wanting to keep it to prevent us from getting dehydrated. That's why during heat waves, older adults are most dramatically affected. And most of the people who die in heat waves, like a big one in Europe just a few years ago, are older people who die of dehydration. So especially when it's hot out, even if you don't feel like you're sweating, make sure that you're hydrating yourself, getting enough water, and getting enough salt to go with it. So not just the water, but your body is a balance of water and salt. So for example, make sure that you're eating a few potato chips or some cold cuts or some cheese with your water, especially on hot days. You know, you have a license to eat. Don't go crazy.
That's great. Potato chips. All right.
But you have a license to eat some salty foods, especially when it's hot out like that.
That's great. So the next slide up is how to talk to your doctor. And I want to cover what tests. I want to talk about vaccines, and also, like when I go for my annual checkup, what should I ask my doctor to look at? I mean, are there standard lab tests that every older adult should be asking for? Like, what's the best way to use the medical system as it currently exists to track our health?
Yeah, so there's a great list of questions here, and I know this is being recorded. You're also welcome to take a picture of this. These are questions that will make your doctor hate me. But they're good questions to ask, and they're the questions that I ask when I go to the doctor. Make sure to and they're not all questions either. Make sure you tell your doctor what matters the most to you. Make sure you tell your doctor what's most important for you to talk about, that agenda. First thing you walk in the door, set the agenda. But then when you're discussing, you know, should we do this test? Should we try this medicine? Should I have the surgery? What's the goal? How is it supposed to help you? And you know, that's a bit deeper than just, well, it's for this problem. Great, but how is that supposed to help me as a whole person? Should we still be doing this? You know, just because we've been doing it for 20 years, is it still the right thing to do? Still the right medicine? And how does this affect everything else that I have going on? So, you know, one more medicine is never just one more medicine. It interacts with other stuff. It might cause, we talk through that side effect cascade. So whatever it is we're thinking about, how does that affect everything else? And is this right for me? And Chris, that's how I'll segue into how do you know what you should be, you know, what test should I be getting? What screening should I be doing? What vaccine should I be getting? You know, the good news about one of the good things about the computerization of our healthcare, some things are not so good, like the doctors stare at the computer screen instead of you. But one of the things that is good is they will have a checklist of all the things all the preventative care, the routine care that should be done for someone like you. Are you due for a shingles vaccine? Are you due for colon cancer screening? So hopefully you don't have to think of all that yourself, but you can also look all that up. Hopefully it will continue to exist, but there is the United States Preventative Services Task Force is the government associated body, or it's the body that advises the government, advises Medicare and Medicaid and things like that on what kind of routine preventative care every American should get based on where you are in life and things like that. USPSTF. You can look that up on the internet and see what all the recommendations are. Is it right for me, though, is the important thing. So cancer screening is a great example of that. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands again, but some of you may have had the experience of maybe asking a doctor, should I get a colonoscopy or a mammogram, and being told you're too old. That's the wrong answer. Decisions like that should never be based on how old you are. But that doesn't mean that it's always going to help you. Decisions like that should be based on your overall state of health. For example, colonoscopies are amazing for preventing colon cancer. I'm sure that everyone in this room has had one already. Colonoscopies help to prevent colon cancer over the next 10 years. That's why we get them about every 10 years. The hard question to ask is, am I likely to benefit from that 10 years from now? So it's not about how old you are, but based on your overall health state, your medical problems, what's likely to happen in the future. Well, basically, are you going to be around in 10 years? If so, if you're healthy in 90, you have a pretty good chance of being around in 10 years. And it might actually make sense for you to have a colonoscopy when you're 90, if you're a healthy 90-year-old. If you're 65 and you're struggling with a lot of different serious chronic problems, you're starting to develop some cognitive impairments, you have heart failure, your kidneys have failed, you probably won't benefit from a colonoscopy. So it's not about your age, it's about the overall state of your health. And that can be a difficult conversation to have, but never, well, this is really gonna get me in trouble, Chris. Never let a doctor tell you that this or that should or shouldn't happen because of your age or because you're too old. That's not a thing.
And I always go, so John, if a doctor says to me, what do you expect at your age? What should I do?
Find a new doctor.
Okay, so I've got a bunch of questions, folks who take a lot of vitamins, supplements. How should older adults approach that? Because boy, there's so much stuff out there.
Yeah, there is so much stuff out there, and there's so much stuff that probably isn't going to hurt you, but we also don't have a lot of evidence about. And even the good old multivitamin, and I'll admit I take a multivitamin. It's actually really hard to show in clinical trials that improves health. Does that mean you shouldn't take it? Well, I just said I take it. It's not going to hurt me, and even if I'm not sure how much it's helping, that's okay. But there's a lot of stuff that falls into that category. Supplements and vitamins that develop that convincing evidence, they become drugs. And there are examples of that, of fish oil, for example, being pharmaceuticalized in a sense, turning into a specific drug that's prescribed for certain people with bad cholesterol. There's a relatively small number of things that have that level of evidence, though. To be fair, a lot of the stuff isn't going to hurt you, but some of it might. The important thing is these are medicines. They do something in your body, and so when you're, for example, giving your medication list to your doctor, make sure you give them everything you take, not just the ones from the pharmacy, but all the supplements, your medicines, vitamins too, because they can interact with things, and they can cause side effects. So, that new symptom, you at least want your doctor to be able to think of, is it a side effect of one of your prescribed medicines, or could it also be a side effect of one of the supplements? We at least need to know that. So hopefully that helps.
Okie dokie. So John's gonna be around a little bit afterwards to talk to individuals. I want to move along and talk about stuff that's happening at the Buck, and John is largely responsible for this. The word is that after years of doing great things to help worms and mice and fruit flies live longer, we're now able to turn our attention to also include human beings. So we are doing clinical trials for older adults at the Buck. Talk about it, John. What's happening?
Yeah, this is really exciting, Chris. And it's not just exciting for for Marin County and Sonoma County and the Buck Institute, but it's exciting for the field of aging research. I mentioned a bit earlier that, for so long, so many people thought getting old was just something that happened, and it wasn't something you could study or understand. But we know that's not the case now. We know that the bad parts of aging, at least, these are driven by cellular and molecular mechanisms that we can study and we can understand, the same way that we can understand what drives cancer, what drives heart disease. And a lot of smart people have been working on this in the laboratory with worms and flies, like you said, Chris, for many years now. But that science is beginning to move into people. This may sound like science fiction. It probably does. But there are already dozens, if not more than 100 clinical trials underway in the United States to test interventions, including drugs, that target the biology of aging in order to improve people's health. So research to try to change aging at a very molecular cellular level to improve people's health, that is actually happening now. It's in its early stages. I would use the analogy of the field is kind of like what the field of heart disease was in the 1960s. When we were talking about, bed rest and aspirin for heart attacks. We have a long way to go, but it is a field that's happening now. And it's happening in part now at the Buck Institute. So we want to take that science of aging to find out if things work the same in people. We don't want to just make worms live forever. We want to actually help people. And we want to eventually learn, I want to eventually learn how to change practice, how we can use this science for all of us to be healthier for longer, to help to slow the onset of chronic diseases, to slow or treat these geriatric syndromes like dementia or delirium, to help us all to stay healthier, more independent longer. Because that's the promise of targeting aging. It's that it's not just one thing. You're actually getting at all of it at the same time. The same aging that's happening in your brain, your muscles, all at the same time.
So a lot of the clinical trials that are underway are based in large part, total part, on some research that you've done that involves something called ketone bodies. There's a trial called Takeoff that I think is really exciting that involves that. Give us a short scoop on ketone bodies and what the promise is of those.
Yeah, so the studies we're doing at Buck fall into two broad categories. One are studies where we're trying to see if the biology that we've studied for years in mice and worms, to see if it works the same in people as a way towards moving interventions towards clinical applications. Ketone bodies are an example of that. So my laboratory has studied for a number of years the science of ketone bodies and how it affects aging in mice, how it affects the aging brain, how they affect our aging bodies. And the long and the short of it is that all that science suggests that having a little more ketone bodies around for your body, your brain to use as energy might really be helpful. Might be helpful for your brain and might also be helpful for your body, particularly if you're becoming frail. So we want to find out if that's actually the case. So we're running a large national NIH-funded multi-center trial called Takeoff, which is targeting aging with a ketone ester for function in frailty. So we're doing this together with older adults who are starting to slow down, who aren't too frail, but are on the way to becoming frail. And we want to see if them taking ketone bodies in the form of a ketone ester will help to address the chronic inflammation and the energy problems that are associated with frailty, to see if that will help the biology of frailty and help people be stronger and help their brains work better. So that's an example of testing if this aging science actually works in people as an important stepping stone towards, maybe a whole lot of people could benefit from that if it worked.
So after this event, you are welcome to talk to folks from our clinical research center. they are in the room, raise your hand. They are here. They're happy to talk to you. It's out in the lobby. They can explain all the clinical trials, answer your questions. You'll have a chance if you want to show interest in getting involved. So
now Chris, so some of our studies don't involve taking anything. They just involve trying to use this complicated biology that we can do at the Buck to better understand the aging process in general. So an example of that is a study that's about to launch, funded by the Federal Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H, which is going to see how all sorts of things change day to day, week to week, month to month in people. What do I mean by that? We can measure a lot these days. If you go get your blood drawn and get your labs done, a bunch of stuff gets measured, dozens of things. We can measure tens of thousands of things in our blood now. All of the little proteins, all the cells, all the molecules, we can measure all of them. We've been able to do that for a while. The thing is, we don't know what it means. You can measure 10,000 things, but if you don't know what it matters, if something's up or something's down, then how can you actually use that to help? The hope is that if you actually understood how to measure 100,000 things in a person, you would be able to predict their health decades in advance. You'd be able to make their medicine more precise, to know, would they benefit from this or that? You'd be able to make healthcare a whole lot better and more personal. But first, we need to know, if you measure 100,000 things right now, and an hour from now, are they all going to be the same? Or a lot of them just going to go up and down? Or if we measure it a week from now? So this study is called Time, and we're looking for time travelers who will donate their own time and donate their blood to help understand how we can take this big data and actually apply it to improve people's health. So those are two examples of work being done at the Buck, and I want to say, I tried to say that we're doing this with partners like you, because I want this to be a partnership with the community in which we exist. The Buck is of Marin, it is of Sonoma, it is of the North Bay. And we've always tried to be involved in that community, having school kids come learn how to isolate DNA, giving people tours, which many of you have gone on. But being able to involve you guys directly in our research as partners is something really special. We're creating all this from scratch. This didn't exist a couple of years ago. So we can make it the way that we want it to be. And I want it to be something that is with you, listens to you. What science do you think is important to do? What problems do you think are important for us to research and solve? How can we help do that together? And I hope that part of that will be some of you volunteering your time and your blood to participate in our studies. But that is a two-way street. That's really important to me, that this is of our community. And so we have several of our staff here. Well, part of that too is wanting to engage as much of our community as we can. And that's why we have several of our studies will enroll in Spanish, and we have several Spanish language speaking staff. And we want everyone to be involved in the science that we're doing, because this is going to sound corny, Chris, because Chris, aging affects all of us.
Best case scenario, right? I tell
Yeah.
people it's like aging is a challenge, but compared to the alternative, I'll take it.
So studying aging has to involve all of us. That's really important to me, and I hope you feel the same way.
So thank you for that, John. He's going to hang around a little bit. I've gotten more than a few questions from people who are curious about the current administration and how that might impact efforts at the Buck. From my perspective, I can tell you that we're all sort of worried, and that, but we don't know yet. Things are in the courts, things are, our leadership are doing a great job. Eric Verdin, our CEO, has been to Washington to testify. He was on KTVU. We're speaking up every chance we get to say how important funding is to keep the research going. We get half of our funding at the Buck from government grants. So it's a scary time, but I'm trying to keep, during the World War II in London, when they were under the Blitz, which this sort of feels like, it was like, keep calm and carry on. So that's kind of what those of us in the trenches are doing. But yeah, it's scary. So from your perspective, John, what's your take on what's happening?
Speak out and support the National Institutes of Health, and lots of other things too. But the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute on Aging, has truly changed the way that we care for older adults. And this was in the mission statement from the NIA from 50 years ago, that every older American deserves to enjoy health in their older years in return for the service that they have done during their lives. And that is still very much true. And the NIA supports everything from the most transformational basic science, which it's done since it was part of its founding mission 50 years ago, to learn how to understand the molecular cellular basis of aging to improve health. But everything from that to how to support caregivers who are taking care of people with dementia, everything in between. And the NIA is a national jewel. And almost everything I've talked to you about today can be traced back to research that was funded by the NIA and carried out by academic researchers, geriatricians. None of that would exist without the NIH and the NIA. So please speak out. Science matters, research matters, and health matters.
So my last question for you, John, and this is a great, sweet question. What do you find to be the most fascinating detail of the aging process? He wasn't prepared for this one, so we're going to see. Be a surprise for me too.
It's actually pretty easy to answer. What I find fascinating and hopeful is that people get happier as they age. And I hope I do too.
Okay, folks. So in closing, if you haven't been on a tour, please come on a tour. We do them on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. We have a new museum exhibit at the Buck. So if you haven't been in a while, you might want to come back on a tour so that you can check that out. You can learn more about aging. We have a really popular online course about the biology of aging. You can find it on our website. It gets really great reviews. We have a podcast called We're Not Getting Any Younger Yet that features interviews with researchers in aging from across the spectrum, across the country, even I think some international folks. And then finally, keep up with us. So you can go on our website. You can sign up for our newsletter if you really want to know what's happening at the Buck. Do that. And then we're all over social media. So as John said, support us, get online, like us, join the fight to have us all be as healthy as possible, as long as possible. Thank you so much. It's been great being here.
Thank you, everyone. Again, another thank you to you, Dr. Newman and Chris. This was a wonderful hour-and-a-half presentation. We did get one question about if the recording of this presentation will be available. We will be putting a link and hopefully a copy of the slides on our website. So check out our website. If you would like to subscribe to the Insider newsletter, it's something we send out every 2 weeks with information about all the programs that we have, but we'll also put the link in our Insider if you're already subscribed. And finally, if you're hungry, the Vivalon Cafe is open next door for lunch. Thank you all for joining us. We're really thrilled to have you here, and what a wonderful morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know.